listening to, I say you are listening to, you are absolutely listening to the George Espinlove Show, coming to you live from the Funny Farm. Now, with no further ado, here comes Georgie!
Thank you. Thank you. Hubba. My goodness gracious, Aunt Sally. Hey, to all our friends down the street, around the corner, across this great nation, and around the world, I welcome you to the George Espinlove Show, coming to you live from the Funny Farm in a place called Our World. We have no idea where that's at. We don't have a mailbox. We have no specific mailing address, but we do have an email. You know, that digital kind of stuff. We are in the 21st century in our world. Email me, George C.E., that's George C.E. at Comcast.net. That's George C.E. at Comcast.net. Thank you for your emails. Thank you for everyone that's going to be emailing us. We answer them, and we will answer them, and so on and so forth. Hey, I want you to know something. We have every light on in the sound booth in the studio. It's still daylight outside, so we don't need lights out there. But we have lights on everywhere. The kitchen is right off to the side of the Funny Farm radio studio, where all the guests are, standing room only in here, and they're on the outside. We've got every light in the barn on. I mean, every single light. And you say, well, Espinlove, why you got every light on? Because sometimes I get scared in the dark. You know what I'm saying? And tonight might be one of those nights, because we have a lady with us tonight that's going to tell us what happens when we die. Now, if I only had some of that deep Boris Karloff organ music playing right about now, that would be right for the scene, I'm telling you. No, I'm not going to explain who Boris Karloff is. Anyhow, we are going to bring her on in just a second, but a reminder, email us, GeorgeCE at Comcast.net, GeorgeCE at Comcast.net, excuse me, and we will be delighted to receive, and most assuredly, we will reply to your email. We have two goals here. One is to put a smile on your face, even if it is for but a second. And the other one is to make you just as crazy as the rest of us around here. If we can do one, we'll be happy. If we can do both of them, I mean, if we can put both of them on you at the same time, oh boy, you talk about us getting excited around here. Ooh. And you will become an official loon. And we need more loons. The world's much too serious sometimes. We need to lighten up. But anyhow, I need to say this before we go any further. The views and the opinions expressed herein are the views and the opinions of the guest, and does not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the host or staff of the George Espinlove Show. And so, having said that, having done all the little particulars, let's get Shelby hooked up here to the board. Having done all those little particulars, we're going to bring Shelby Beckett and put her in the seat. Shelby, welcome to the George Espinlove Show.
Thank you, George. I'm very happy to be here.
I wasn't going too far or too long, was I?
No, not at all.
I messed up and said I wasn't going too far. My wife will tell you I went too far a long time ago, but that's for another day. It's delightful to have you here. And
Thank you.
I told the audience that I have every light on in the studio. There are no dark corners. There there are
No,
no places for shadows, and I think I'm relatively uh, safe. Although I better knock on wood.
well, I think you're completely safe, George. The people have asked me if I've ever been afraid channeling Jared and things of this nature. I've never had any fear because he's a very loving, compassionate, caring, spiritual being, and he doesn't. I've dealt with some dark energies, but with his help, always to send them where they need to go, which is to the light or wherever is appropriate for them. So I don't think you need to worry.
Cool, cool. Then I'm not going to worry. Uh,
Good.
you have written a novel by the name of Between. That's kind of that's appropriate. Can you give us a little background of yourself and how you got interested in all this and the whole schmear?
Okay. Well, you want the long or the short version?
Oh, we've got as long as you want to take.
Okay. Well, I'll try not to take too long, but I actually got started in the metaphysical or paranormal, psychic, whatever you want to call it, area. Spiritual is how I prefer to think of it when I work with Jared, because I was a complete skeptic. I had grown up with a very fundamentalist religion that seemed to me eventually to not make sense because they were saying God is love, but everybody who doesn't believe exactly the way we do is going to hell, and that didn't really make much sense to me. So I had rejected that, and for about 4 years, I was an atheist, and that was very uncomfortable, and then I had sort of mellowed into agnosticism when I was talking with a friend I was teaching at that time. I had majored in Latin, among other things, and I was teaching Latin in a high school, and the librarian in there I had become friends, and she was rhapsodizing about astrology one day, and I said to her, "Oh, come on, you don't believe in that stuff." And then I felt sort of embarrassed, and I thought, well, that was rude. I'll just go read about it, and then I'll show her how silly it is. And then I was even more embarrassed because I started reading about it, and I got interested. In fact, I got pretty well convinced that there really was something to astrology, even though I never have done anything particularly with that. Because when I was, just before my daughter was born, I was reading in the area that, because she was going to be born in November, which is the Scorpio month, which is a very intense sign. And it said, if you have a baby that's going to be born in November, when the child arrives, get the strongest playpen you can find and get in it. And when she arrived, sure enough, that's the way it was. She was very strong-willed. She's a wonderful young woman, but she still is pretty strong-willed, which has stood her in good stead. But I didn't really go into astrology. I got interested in clairvoyance, which is perceiving things at a distance of time or space, and telepathy, which has to do with mind-to-mind communication without, speaking or writing verbally. And so when a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to join a psychic spiritual study group, I said, I guess that would be okay. So this group was led by, of all people, a Presbyterian minister in this little Ohio town where I was living. And his church asked him to leave after they found out what he was doing. But by then we'd been meeting for 2 years every week. And we would do an experiment each week on each topic, clairvoyance one week and telepathy another week. And I don't know if you've heard of automatic writing. Are you familiar with that?
No, but let me take a guess at it, and you
Okay.
correct me. Is that automatic writing? Now this is an Espinlaub definition of automatic writing. The pen writes all by itself on a piece of paper.
Close, but
Oh,
not quite there.
all right.
No cigar, George. I'm sorry.
Okay, no cigar.
But what it is it's a form of what's called automatic processes. And you do hold a pen and preferably like a felt tip that works very, moves very easily. And you ask for a communicator to speak or to write a message through you, and then you just sit quietly, and it feels like your hand is being pulled. And most of the time it just makes squiggles or lines in the beginning, and mine immediately started writing full sentences. So I discovered I was quite good at that. Fortunately, our group leader, the minister, had taught us how to shield ourselves against negative energies. And so we would always open with the Lord's Prayer, and then we would surround ourselves with God's light and state that we were only open to receiving information from someone who came directly from the light. So that has stood me in really good stead all these years, and for that reason I have really never felt afraid in making a connection. I found that the automatic writing was very sloppy because your hand doesn't lift up, it doesn't dot I's, it doesn't cross T's or make periods. So I thought, well, I'll see if I can do it on the typewriter. Excuse me, of course my throat is hoarse tonight. And so I found I could do that, and I could be sitting with my hands typing, talking to you, and when I'd get through, we'd have a message. And for about 4 months or so, it was very, just love thy neighbor, love thyself kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And then after about 3 or 4 months, it suddenly, without any warning, changed the nature of the presentation. The way it was worded was different. It was much more flowing. It said things that made sense and really had something to tell you about living your life. And I discovered that we could ask questions, and it would answer the questions. And it finally said, if you will sit quietly, I'll speak through you. And so it took me about 6 months to work my nerve up to do that because I didn't know how to do it exactly, and I wasn't sure what I was doing. And during that period, my husband had a friend who felt he was psychic. Everybody's psychic, basically, anyway. It just means of the mind or the spirit. And, if you think of somebody you haven't thought of in a long time, sure enough, they'll call you in a day or two, something like that. That's what would be considered a psychic functioning. But anyway, he said, I think that you're connected with a male entity, and his name is Jared, Jared. So when finally I did allow the speaking to take place, my husband asked, is that your name? And he said no, but he'd had many names in many lifetimes, and we probably couldn't pronounce his now anyway, and so Jared would be fine. So we have, for the last almost 40 years, called him Jared.
Oh.
And so that was how I made that connection originally, and I have not had any other communicator as such in all that time, and he doesn't work with anyone else, he says, but me, for several reasons. But I have always felt the caring and the love and the compassion that he has for people flowing through. He describes himself as a servant of what he calls the source, of what we would think of as God, but he said, I use that term because it's generic, and someone from any religion can relate to that. It's the source of all things. So he's a servant of the source, and he says the source has given us free will and won't tamper with it, so therefore he can't tamper with free will either. And so he only functions by answering questions. It's not a psychic reading. He does not tell you things you have not asked about. And sometimes, and he doesn't pretend to be perfect and know everything. So if you can ask him anything you want to, but if he doesn't know, he'll tell you if he doesn't know. If he's not allowed to tell you because it's tampering, he'll tell you that, and otherwise he'll answer it to the best of his ability. And his take on things is you use your common sense. Don't just believe everything because it's psychic or a reading of some kind or, whatever. Mm-hmm. People, it's really kind of scary. I used to teach ESP development classes, and I finally quit because the attitude was sort of, it's psychic, it's wonderful, it has to be true. Well, no, it doesn't, because there are a lot of different factors that take place, including the fact that it's impossible for anyone to receive material that way or even channel it. either in writing or verbally, and even going into a full trance, which I don't do. I go into an altered state, and not color it in some way because it's coming through the human organism. It comes through, my brain, my vocal cords, all of this, and it can't avoid having some element of coloring, although hopefully as little as possible. So you always listen with your common sense and don't just believe everything whole cloth, especially if it doesn't make sense to you. If it doesn't make sense, then don't use it. If it does, if it resonates and you think you can use it to help yourself, then take it and do something to make your life better. But Jared's attitude is that, if you think it's garbage, you know what you do with that.
You mentioned, excuse me, you mentioned that you grew up in a fundamental environment.
Yes, I did.
What did you do with the things? And I know exactly where you're coming from. What do you do with or what did you do with the things such as we shouldn't dabble in witchcraft? King Saul, he consulted the wizards and so on and so forth, and there was a repercussion about that, and all the things that the scriptures say about. I mean, did you have to sort your way through that when you started in this field?
Well, yes and no. The no part is that I have never considered genuine communication as something like witchcraft or wizardry or anything that way.
Uh-huh.
And, all of us, if we're trying to grow spiritually and we attune ourselves, if you believe in angels, if you believe in guardians, angelic guardians or something of this nature, these are beings that will give you guidance if you ask them for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that guidance comes basically from the God being, from God, and that it has nothing to do with witchcraft. And so I've always felt with Jared a sense of clarity and purity that comes from that same source, that same area, that same place of light. If I ever felt that that wasn't happening, I would stop doing it immediately.
I guess you kind of clarified it in the beginning when you said you only want to communicate with what's the word? Good spirits or
what a communicator only with communications that come from the light directly. That they're only associated with the light of God. The rest of it, they're apparently, and I, in the beginning, I thought it was sort of hokey, that there are a lot of negative energies and beings and so forth sort of hanging around, looking for a voice, wanting a way to reconnect. And yet I've encountered a number of these and worked with some releasement, as we call it, of those that have attached to other people and things this way. And so I now feel fairly certain that actually they do exist,
mm-hmm.
And that they can interfere if you don't know how to shield yourself. And that's one thing I think is very important for everybody to learn. And it's very easy. You just simply focus on the God light and you breathe it into the top of your head. You let it run down and fill your entire body, and then allow it to flow out through your heart and around you like a suit of armor. And this, in the New Testament, Paul talks about putting on the whole armor of God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think of this as the armor of God, that you have that light like a suit of armor, shielding you and protecting you. Now, you can breach that yourself by feeling negative, angry, upset, and so forth. That'll make a crack in it that negative energy can get in, but you can clean that out and
mm-hmm.
get rid of it. You ask the angels of light to come and remove whatever you picked up during the day that is negative and take it to wherever it belongs. and to seal you back up again. But it makes a huge difference.
And Jared's been the only one that you've communicated with all these years.
Yeah, at least in the way of direct speaking, yes. I sort of have some helpers that I feel I communicate with and get information from on a less, I don't know what you would call it, less lofty area. I don't know how to put that. I don't like thinking in terms of levels and things that way. But they're more like little daily helpers. They're guardians and things that way that aren't coming to deliver a specific message or to give information that will be helpful to a number of people or a lot of people, but are my own personal, energy guardians in a sense. So I feel I communicate with them, not in the same way that they don't come through me the way that Jared does.
Did Jared ever tell you where he came from, or?
Well, yes, people have asked about that. He never volunteers information about himself or anyone else, or at least very, very rarely does he volunteer anything because he says that's tampering. With free will. If you haven't asked and he tells you something you have not asked about, he is tampering with your free will because you may not be willing or ready to hear what he has to say. But once something has been said to you, it's like a seed that has been planted and cannot be uprooted. And it's like he won't predict the future, for example. And if you and your listeners will sort of bend your arm in front of you and stick your fingers out, think of your elbow down to your wrist as the past. Your wrist is the present, and your hand with your fingers is the future. But your fingers aren't together. They're spread as wide apart as they can go, and there are a lot of other possible futures. These are all your possible futures. Each finger and a lot of other possible futures, like you had maybe 20 fingers spread out there or something. And the decisions and the choices that we make daily influence which of those futures we will walk into. And in fact, that's one of the themes of the book is the critical importance of choices and how those ripple out and affect our futures. They affect other people. They affect not only our lives, but other lives. For example, the heroine, the protagonist, however you want to think of her, Stacy, the young healer who's in a coma and caught between this world and the next, his influence and what happens to her there and leads to a final critical choice at the end of the book is a choice that she made before the book even begins. And because of that choice, all the rest of it opens up the way that it happens. So let's say, for example, you go to someone and then they're saying they're a psychic and they're going to give you a reading. And they say, I see 6 months down the road, you're going to have a bad accident. And then they leave it at that. And as far as Jared is concerned, that is not really being responsible, because unless they feel obligated to tell you that that's something really important they need to let you know, they need to realize that that's only one possible future. That doesn't have to happen. And what the only responsible thing to do if you're going to mention it is to say something like, I see 6 months down the road, you might have a bad accident. What are you doing right now that could cause that? Do you drink and drive? Do you text and drive these days? Do you run red lights? Do you only partially stop for stop signs? Are you paying attention when you drive? If any of these things are happening, you might want to sort of get your act together so that you don't have to go down that particular future line. And so we're choosing and making decisions all the time that then open up whatever line of the future that we're going to go into, into taking place. So now, have I gotten off the track here?
No. It is all interesting. I want to ask you, because this just came to me. Do you feel that for the most part, we, and when I say we, just people in general, we we are not sensitive enough to our spirituality, and we're missing out on some great things.
I do. I think we all have that problem in one way or another, except maybe the ones who have devoted their lives completely to spiritual growth and don't interact much with the rest of us. And even then, I'm sure they have their moments. But we get so caught up in our daily lives, in all the busyness and everything that goes on, that we pretty much forget to go into those areas of our being where we're making contact with the angelic realms or with God, or however you want to think of it, with the spiritual world. And it makes a huge difference when you focus back in that direction, because it gives you the opportunity to deal with your life in a different way. Jared has 7 steps. Actually, I'm redoing the book that originally came out that I put out for my clients. Of 6 steps, we're changing it to keys because it opens everything up in a 7th key. But for example, put your focus where it needs to be, which is on the fact that you have this interconnection with God, and there's nothing really that you can do about it. It's just there. It can't be broken off. You can't lose it. You may ignore it. You may feel that it's gone because you turned your back on it, but it's always there. And if you will focus on that, that gives you a stability, like an anchor right away. And then to, like we were talking about the past and the future, stay out of the past, stay out of the future. Both of those are basically just fantasies. The future is always a fantasy, isn't it? Because it never gets here.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes, it's always now.
Right.
If you could build a time machine, you went 200 years into what you think of as the future. The minute you open the door and step out, what is it?
Now.
It's your new now.
Yeah.
So the future is always a fantasy, and when you start getting into it, most of the time we worry, we're anxious, we're fearful, and all that's doing is drawing those things more likely into our experience, because what we focus on is what we tend to draw to us. And in some ways, the past is a fantasy too, because we always see the past or remember it through the filter of emotion. And we can't even be sure the farther away we get from an event if it really happened the way that we think it did. And you know yourself, you've read that if you 5 people witness an auto accident, you're going to get probably 5 different stories of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because everybody views things through the filter of their emotions. So even that's not reliable. And when you're holding on to grudges or anger against people or events, all you're doing is dragging around with you things that continue to keep you from being able to live happily. Because if you don't forgive and let go of the past, the burden is just almost more than you can bear, because it just poisons everything. The only place we can live is right now. And what Jared says, if you're jumping back and forth between the past and the future, you're jumping over the present, which is the only time you can live, so you're sort of wasting your life.
That makes sense. Makes sense. How? Let me ask you one more question about Jared.
Sure.
How did he? What's the words I'm looking for? How did he first show up?
Well, through the writing. I connected through first of all, the automatic writing and typing.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes tell people I met him on a typewriter. And then gradually working into the speaking. And for quite a while, people would send me questions, and Jared would write answers to them on the computer. And actually, in those days, it was a typewriter, which was very slow and full of mistakes. And then when we went into the speaking part, then the writing got less than this. Although I still have clients from maybe 20 years ago who still will write and ask a question and want an answer written to them so that they can read it over and over. Although I usually burn a CD if we have a session with somebody and it's all spoken.
You said, and it's on your homepage, and ladies and gentlemen, go to Shelby Beckett. ShelbyBeckett.com. ShelbyBeckett.com. She got a very unique website. And you said there on your homepage, Shelby, somewhere between this world and the next lies the realm where legends still live, where thoughts become things, and souls are prepared for entry into the life beyond the one they experienced on Earth. And that obviously that's why you titled your novel Between, right?
That's exactly right, because it deals in large part, although a lot of it is also set here in this world, but a lot of it takes place in that between area. And what makes it so different from other so-called paranormal novels is that much of the material about the between area comes from Jared. Now, I have fictionalized the events and the people, that are taking place and so forth. But if you want to go to the website, you can read a chapter of the book, and I picked the chapter that describes what is called the Entry Processing Center, where souls come right after they've lost their physical bodies and are processed through whatever happens there, and so on and so forth. So you can get an idea of what Jared is talking about when he talks about between. Although the between area is very large, apparently, and it's full of potential and possibilities, and a great deal of the action does take place there. In fact, there's an ominous power that our young healer encounters, and he sees in her in her exceptional abilities a tool he hopes he can use to gain greater control over our world. And a great deal of the story deals with what happens about that.
When we leave this old vessel that we came in, I'm about 9/10 loony anyhow, but I guess I can only ask you the way that I can ask you. When we leave this vessel that we came in, do we instantly go somewhere, or are we asleep for a while and then we go somewhere? How's the process work?
It all depends. According to Jared, it can be both of those things and other things as well. Part of it depends on how you have died, whether it was extremely traumatic, extremely painful, very easy, very peaceful. Both extremes will produce often different results, immediate results. And what he says is that if and that's one reason on the website, if you go to the facts, it'll give you the 10 tips on how to know if you're dead and what to do if you are. Because apparently, for some people, for a variety of reasons, either because they have had a very sudden death, and they actually don't even realize that they've lost their physical bodies because they continue to look and feel as they did in large measure, although pain will be gone. If you've been in pain, the pain will normally be gone unless you are still focused on it. And you can continue to reproduce it because thoughts become things, as it says, and you can create that for yourself. And sometimes people want to hang around if they've been addicts. They sort of don't want to go anywhere. They want to find another body that they can express or sort of vicariously continue to enjoy the addiction. So they will look for someone who, let's say they were heavy smokers, and they look for somebody who smokes heavily that they can attach themselves to and sort of express through them their desires to continue smoking or something this way. Sometimes they will be taken to what is known as a hospital wing, sort of. It's very similar to a hospital wing where they're cared for. if they have had a long, drawn-out illness in which they are just exhausted, they may rest or sleep, as you think of it, in the hospital wing for quite some time until their spirits are ready to deal with the change that has taken place, because it's very, very different to be without your physical body. And it just depends on what the person and sometimes what the person expects, although sometimes things happen that don't fit the expectation. There are very similar experiences that many people who have what are called near-death experiences go through. Have you heard of Raymond Moody?
No.
Wrote Life After Life. He's, I think, an MD who began noticing people who were declared clinically dead, their hearts stopped during a surgery or something this way, or during a heart attack for several minutes or even longer, but they would be revived. And so he began and would have a story of what they had experienced. And so he began collecting up a lot of these, well, I hate to say story, make it sound like it's a fiction, but a lot of these experiences that people had. And he wrote a book called Life After Life, and other books since then. And one of the books now on, I think it's number one on the nonfiction bestseller list, at least in some of the lists, is called Proof of Heaven by Eben Alexander, and he is a neurosurgeon.
Mm-hmm.
And he was essentially brain dead for an incredibly long time and had all kinds of experiences, and came back and was able to completely rejuvenate his body, or it was done for him, and to bring back the story of what had happened to him. So, but there's often bright light, a dark tunnel with a bright light at the end of it, a loving being that just infuses the entire soul with love and acceptance. Sometimes people see their own idea of a religious figure, what would be Jesus or Mary or Buddha or whoever it would be, depending on what their religion is. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just have a sense of angelic presence. But those are very similar things that have happened to thousands upon thousands of people. There's a guy, what's his name? His name is Dr. Jeffrey Long, and he's written a book called Evidence of the Afterlife, and he has an actual website that has collected stories, and actually he has a form that people fill out and check off what they have experienced, and then they assess it and do it numerically, by percentages of how many experienced this particular thing, and so on and so forth. It's very, very interesting, and he feels that it's not just evidence, but he's convinced that there is life after death because of all these experiences that he's cataloged.
Now, when you say it depends how you died,
it can, yeah.
Yeah. Is there a set of rules that says if you died this way, this will be the case, or if you died that way?
No, I don't think there's a set of rules. I think it depends on the person, their beliefs, their needs. I don't know. Actually, nobody's asked Jared about that, so I can't tell you what he says about it. But as I said, he only answers questions. He doesn't offer information.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been gathered from some of the near-death experience people that, for example, they see themselves during a surgery after, suppose that the heart stops,
mm-hmm.
and they're finding themselves floating up to the ceiling, looking down on their own bodies as the doctors are frantically working to revive them. And when they finally come back, and sometimes they go out of the room and they go down the hall and hear people talking down there, they can come back and recite word for word what was said, and they've done that. In fact, one woman apparently found herself floating outside the hospital and went up several stories, and she saw I think it was red, a tennis shoe with the laces untied, sitting on a ledge outside one of the windows. Mm. And so she was talking about it when she came back, and one of the nurses actually went and looked for it and found it.
Wow.
And it was right where she said it was, and it looked just like she had described. Mm. So it depends on what's happening, and people are very, of course, shocked to be able to see themselves. They don't know what to do at first, and if they can't get back into their bodies, if the body just goes ahead and dies, then usually there will be some kind of angelic being that will come to help them. Or if they sort of turn away from that because they really don't want to leave, they feel they have to stay near their loved ones, then a variety of other things can take place. They follow somebody home, and sometimes they don't even realize that they've lost their bodies. On that 10 tips thing, it says you can't get anybody to hear you or notice you. And they can't understand why people are now ignoring them. If you've seen the movie The Sixth Sense, that's a perfect example of number one, mm-hmm. Of not knowing that you're dead. It's just, it depends on the person, it depends on the circumstances. I think the more traumatic the death and the more sudden, the more likely it is that the person, for a little while at least, doesn't even recognize that they don't have a physical body anymore.
And another tip to know if you're dead or not, you can walk through solid objects like doors and walls.
Right.
Some of the people that's had out-of-body experiences or near-death experience, has anyone come back, do you know of, or have you ever read or heard of somebody actually doing that and then explaining what it was like to them?
I think I've read that there are some that have said that they found themselves moving right through the ceiling or through the wall. They did not describe in detail, although I do in the novel. Mm-hmm. It describes what it's like to go through the wall, or one character actually hides inside the wall and merges these atoms with the atoms of the wall. But most of the time people are so stunned that they're not paying that close attention, I don't think, to details like that. They're just amazed that they can do what they're doing.
What about folks that have been told by the medical people that you have 6 months or a year or 2 weeks, and they pass away?
I think a large part is because they believed what they were told.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's the worst possible thing that a doctor can do in most cases, because they're essentially giving them a death sentence.
Yeah.
And they don't know. How do they know? All they know is that from their past experience, most people with that particular illness at that particular stage of it lived that many months or weeks or whatever. But who knows if they did that because they'd been told they were going to do that. We're so susceptible to suggestions, mm-hmm. and especially when we're ill. I think, and people talk about false hope, and yet hope and focusing on doing your best to survive and get well is one of the most potent healers of all.
Do you think that when someone's told that, it's only natural for them to say, "Oh boy, it's over," and they give up any kind of hope that they had? And
I think a lot of people do.
And it kills them.
That's right, quite literally. And unless they have the kind of nature that says, "No, I'm not," and those are the people who will survive, are the ones who at least will survive for a while or maybe indefinitely, because they refuse to be given that death sentence, and they're going to do everything they can to see that it doesn't come true.
Wow.
And belief and faith are tremendous in terms of either healing or dying, either way.
You can think and feel emotions, but you no longer seem to have a body.
Well, at least a physical body.
A
yes.
physical body. What
Mm-hmm.
have you been told, or do you know what we look like, or what someone looks like when they go from here to there?
Well, most of the accounts of people in near-death experiences say that very frequently they look just like they did.
Uh-huh.
This is why they're confused. They have the same clothes on, they look the same. Some will say, I know that I am, and that I have some kind of body, but it seems to be made out of light.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't, and they describe some of the beings that come to them as made of light and just have very sort of almost like blurry looking features. They're humanoid in shape so that they can recognize them as beings, and they're there to help them, but they are made of light. And I think that we do have what are called light bodies.
This part, and you mentioned it prior, you find yourself in a dark tunnel with a bright light at the end of it, or you find yourself in darkness or trapped in a frightening space and you're afraid you may be in hell. Is that what happens when you believe before this happened to you, you were so afraid of dying and going to hell, or you just felt that you was going to go to hell? Is that what happens to you when it was your turn to step over?
Well, I think it could be for some people. I don't think there's any cookie-cutter pattern that everybody fits.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if somebody... There is an area, apparently, that sometimes is referred to as the void. Jared refers to it as the completeness, which is sort of the quantum field. And it is like darkness in a way, but it is filled with every possibility, every potentiality. It is quivering with that life of all the potential of being, whatever it may become later. And so sometimes I think people go there and they're frightened because it's to them it's dark. But if you are if you think hell is going to be fire, flames, and all of this, you may actually, Jared says, create that for yourself because you believe it so strongly until you become bored enough with it that you quit doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do find yourself in a dark tunnel, and there seems to be no light at the end, you ask for a light, or if you're in darkness, ask for light or ask for beings of light to come and help you. And as far as I can tell from what he has said and from what these others have experienced, that will take place, and you aren't going to be left alone.
Do you still have the freedom of choice?
Yeah, I think we do. I think, once we've been given that free will, we've still got it. As far as I know. Now, that's another question nobody has really asked Jared. I can't tell you what he would say.
Oh, let it up to me.
Yeah. Huh?
I said, let it up to me.
Yeah.
I always end up asking questions nobody else ever asks.
That's just fine. Questions are great because that's how we learn.
When you see family and friends that have already gone on, and they look glad and happy to see you, but this isn't heaven, right?
Well, it depends. As far as Jared's teachings go, heaven isn't pearly gates and streets of gold and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
What we would think of as heaven would be being in the presence of an awareness of the reality of God and of being a part of that whole massive beingness, and your friends and family being delighted to see you and having a reunion with you and so forth would be part of that joyfulness.
Did you ever learn? Once I guess there comes a point that you become accustomed to this, and accept this, or whatever the word is. Did you ever learn what you actually do there?
Well, there's a great variety of things. According to what Jared will tell people when they ask, he refers to it as going home with a capital H, because the soul goes back to where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that you can do. People sometimes always we continue to learn and grow, no matter what it is we're doing, because that's the whole point, is to learn and to grow in love and in creativity. And so, well, sometimes you'll say people are dancing, or they're gardening, or they're creating beautiful tapestries, or they're doing all kinds of things they may have wanted to do and never got to do here on Earth, or that they find is fulfilling to them and fills them with love and expansiveness and the desire to create beauty and things of this nature. And there's no set pattern. It depends on the personality of the person, their desires, their push to learn in a certain direction, or whatever it might be. It's endlessly expansive.
Does anyone come back as another person?
You're talking about reincarnation?
Yes.
Jared's view of reincarnation is kind of different from the standard one. He does teach that reincarnation exists, but he says that we're going to get into a whole other discussion here. And I don't know how this will strike you or your listeners, but he says that basically God is everything that there is. There is nothing that is not God.
Mm-hmm.
There just simply isn't anything else. And that understanding in its vastness, that it could not relate on a personal level to anything else it would create, it brought into being a slightly lesser form of itself, which he refers to as the source. Some people refer to it as the Christ or whatever, that then created everything else. And things were created in clusters. There would be a core self or soul at the center, and then it would create smaller parts of itself that would travel with it, sort of like a troupe of traveling actors with a director at the center. And these parts would have their own smaller parts that would go in and out in order to gather information and learn and grow, because each cluster, when it goes to a particular reality, I know how bizarre this probably sounds. It took me a while to get it, but it makes sense once I've been working with it all these years, that the soul cluster, the huge, massive cluster, signs kind of like a cosmic contract when it enters a certain reality. For example, we inhabit a very dense physical reality, and so it would agree to abide by the law of gravity, the law of linear time going from past to present to future, the dichotomy of good and evil, and so forth, because apparently at the soul level that does not exist, and everything is simply experience and valid for learning and growth. And I know we're getting into a real sticky area when I say that, but I could explain it further, but let me continue to generalize. Are you with me so far, George?
Yeah, well, that
sort of making sense. I know it must be confusing.
Yeah, just about the time I thought I was getting something, and then I'd fall off my horse, but I
see if you can hang on to the tail, okay?
Yeah.
While we're running. And the reason I'm getting into the background is that according to him, each smaller cluster within the larger one has parts of itself that accomplish, are sent out back into this realm to accomplish certain experiential lines and what we would call a lifetime is one soul part coming in and entering into a physical body, usually at the moment of conception, although not always. And it then sort of, he said it's like pouring liquid into a porous plastic valve. The soul completely saturates the physical and welds itself into it in a sense. But at the same time, it creates a chemical reaction in the brain that produces what we think of as who we see in the mirror, who we are in this lifetime, which he calls personality self. And the personality self has never existed before because it is the unique combination of that particular soul portion and that specific genetic composition of that body. And so we're all totally unique in that sense. And so when the physical body dies, the personality part, which is now welded to the soul part in a sense, continues on, and it goes home. Mm-hmm. And it will continue to do a variety of things while another sort of sibling self, another part of its little cluster will come in and continue that line of experience. And he says that they are so like each other that, let's say somebody had regressed you in hypnotism and you go back and you have a lifetime in which you think you're a Roman general or something, and it would be one of your sibling cells, one of those other parts of your cluster that actually is playing that part, is actually in that role as a Roman general, even though it seems like you are as George in that lifetime, but it's so close in nature by the soul being all from the same cluster that, you know, you can confuse it and think it's you when in reality it's the other sibling self. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is this kind of like when you see someone like a young person in your family and they have taken on, it seems as if they have the mannerisms, or they stand like, or they place their hands a certain way, or they walk a certain way, like maybe like Grandpa, or like Grandma. Is this what you're saying, or am I?
Yeah, this would be because the sibling soul part that has come in would be so closely related to the one that had been in the grandparent, for example, that they may bring with them the memory of those traits and sort of reproduce them.
The reason I asked that is we have 11 grandkids. One of them just turned 5. My father died in 1989, and his name was Joe, and I call this little guy Joe. Number one, he was born on Dad's birthday, February 4th. The second thing is Dad used to stand and he'd look out the window and he'd put his hands behind his back, and I always called it the think and relax mood of Joe Espinlop. Well, this little guy's been doing it as long as I can remember. I mean, he's only been around 5 years now, but he's been doing it, you know, just about from the get-go, when he could get up, walk around, and do these things. And then certain things that he says, I think, wait a minute, I heard that before, but it was from Joe, not this Joe. You know, that's the reason why I asked, Shelby.
Yeah, well, I think that sounds like certainly that is what's going on, is that one of the sibling cells has come into the little one that is so closely related to the self that was soul part of your father, of Joe, that there is a very strong memory pattern that's being carried through there. And probably in great measure in order to help you in certain ways.
I believe that, because when I see this or I hear something, or him just being around, it does something to me. Uh,
Oh, I'm sure it does.
yeah,
Yes.
I could be stressed about something, and this little guy comes around, and I chill right out. Uh, and not saying that I love him any more than I love the other kids. It's just this characteristic he's got about him just blows me away. And I've laid awake at nights thinking about this, wondering about it, uh, almost accepting it, and then nah. But then I'd
I'm
see it
not.
I'd see it repeat itself over and over and over again until I'm thinking it's got to be.
Well, I would agree with you. I think that definitely that connection is there from the way it sounds. And why shouldn't you believe it?
True, true. There's no reason why I shouldn't.
Except that people say, "Oh, that's just your imagination," or "It's just a coincidence."
Uh huh.
But I don't believe in coincidence either.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Other than, those things don't happen, or like you said, just your imagination, or you took a long walk off a short pier. Well, I know I did that a long time ago, but nonetheless,
Yes.
it.
When you see that, you know that you're seeing something familiar.
Hmm.
And, and just because the skeptics would say, well, talk yourself out of it, I don't think that's, there's no reason that it should not happen. And let them prove that it isn't.
That's true. That's so true, and it happens all the time. It's not that it so much happens; it's continually there. It's it's just the way this little guy does things. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's not like he'll do it and then it'll be a year later he'll do it again. This is just his thing. It's just how he is. So it's constantly before
Yeah.
me, uh, and
It'll be interesting to see what happens as he grows older.
yeah, and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy on the inside.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's why it's happening.
That I've always wanted to ask somebody that, but I never knew who to ask. I'm so glad you came along.
Well, I'm glad too.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. When when
Well, I
uh,
think,
when did you write this book? How long ago?
well, I started it about 12 years ago, and it took 8 different revisions to get it done, actually 9. It started out with a totally different story in some ways, and then it morphed into this other one. And once I got started with Jared, I think I realized that he was having input into it, because I would make the chapters out and have it all set up, and then my characters just wouldn't do that. They did something else, and what they did ended up being much better than what I had planned. And I began to realize that I better just go with this and let it go. A lot of things, it made it sort of difficult. For one thing, I like the name Stacy for other people. The heroine's name is Stacy Addison, and I never really wanted that name, but I could not change it. I tried like 5 times to give her a different name, and there was no way she was going to be anything but Stacy Addison, so I finally gave up. And I was going to put a dog in the story, and then this black and white cat comes waltzing in and says, "Forget the dog, I'm just in the story," and that was Max, the cat who can telepathically talk to certain people. And and he's also one of the wise teachers. A lot of what he says, there's a lot of what Jared says that I've interwoven into the story, working very hard to not make it sound preachy, and having my people that were reading for me assure me or tell me if I did, and then assure me when I got it straightened out that it was okay. That it didn't sound like I was giving information just to give information. It fits with the story. But it's been a very interesting process doing it.
I bet it was, and I can see why it would take you 12 years and all those revisions, and you had
Well, and I didn't work at it full time either. I didn't have the opportunity to do
right,
that. So.
and you mentioned that you tried to get rid of that name, and but you couldn't get rid of it. Was there a lot of what's the word? Was there a lot of fussing with some things during the years?
Well, it started out with the heroine being dead instead of in a coma. That was a pretty big change, but it turned out to make a much better story, certainly. And it would have been rather limited the way I had begun it. But it still was that whole in-between idea that I had had from the beginning, and it just kept sort of growing and expanding. And I really enjoyed doing it. I'm looking forward to starting on the sequel, which I already have ideas about. And if anybody does read the book and has any ideas for the sequel, what they'd like to see in it, I would be delighted to have them let me know.
That's amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to go to ShelbyBeckett.com. ShelbyBeckett.com. You can order the book there, right?
Yes, you can order from authorhouse.com, who's my publisher, or you can order from Amazon. Amazon.com will not take, I've got to get my webmaster to change the link. It takes you to Amazon, but not to the book. So when you get to Amazon, just type in my name and the word between, and it should take you right to the book.
Okay.
And be sure that you order the new version. For some reason, there was an older version that I completely rewrote and put on a whole new ending and everything. And you want to get that, or you can be sure to get the right version from Author House. And it's also in Nook and Kindle.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, for only $2.99 on Nook and Kindle, so you can just get it there right away.
All right.
And you can also, if you want a signed copy, you can send me an email, and I have some copies that I can sign if anybody does want that.
Okay, because your address is there where they can mail their check or money order.
Right.
Okay, I got you there.
Yeah, they can just email me and tell me what they want, to whom I should sign it and so forth.
How long you been doing this now?
This as in the book or channeling?
Channeling.
I think it's going to be 40 years this year.
Mm. And you're continually learning new things.
Oh, you can't imagine. I'm now working with a colleague who is helping to develop a quantum energy healing system. And Jared and I are working with her on that. And the things we're learning from that, it just blows my mind. We're not ready yet. We're going to have a book put out before, I hope, too long. But we've just encountered some amazing things while we're doing that. So, yes, I'm learning all the time.
When we grew up, there was no such a thing as a computer.
I know. There weren't even electric typewriters.
No, we had to bang it out and then smack it to the side, and it would ding and all those other kind of things.
Right, that's right.
The old telephone where you stick your finger in the hole and call up with the party line.
Yeah. Right. These kids just don't know what they're missing, right?
No, they when you mention things like that, unless you have an actual picture to show them, and even then they look at you like you got two heads.
Yeah, it's a whole different world now, George. It really is.
Why I said that was there is so much out there, so much new stuff. We had one channel on the TV, if we had a TV at all, and that was black and white. You had to go out and turn the antenna to get it just right.
It was a tiny little screen you could hardly see.
Yep. And radio, that was the big gig then. We could sit around and listen to the drama shows. But now...
And I sort of miss that.
I do too. And I go on the web and I listen to excuse me, old time radio, and with Bob Hope and all the old stuff, And I tell my grandkids about it, and they just look at me like, they turn up their nose and walk away. I say, man, you guys don't know what you're missing. But nonetheless, with so much technology nowadays, we have the opportunity to hear. We have an opportunity to hear just about anything and everything that's coming down the pike. Uh, in fact, sometimes I think we get too much information, so much we get
I would
confused.
agree.
And it don't take me much to get confused. But anyhow, uh,
But there's so much misinformation on the internet. It's just amazing.
yes, yes,
That's why you've got to, like Jared says, listen and read with your common sense.
I like that because number one, number one, there's not much of that left around anymore. But that is a sure way to determine something, right? Common
Well, at
sense.
least it does help. I don't know whether it always does it completely, but if you don't use your common sense and sort of ground yourself, you can just get carried off into the atmosphere. And part of the problem is that so much of it is negative.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
It's full of fear. So many of these doctors' sites and things are all, oh, don't eat this and don't do that, or you're going to die, or you're going to have a heart attack, or you've got to do this and you have to do that. And it's all fear, so much of it.
That's
And they change their minds every other week, it seems like. Don't eat eggs, do eat eggs, the whole thing.
yeah. And I love eggs. Last time I heard they were good for you, and
Well,
if they've
I
said
think they've
anything,
always been good for us.
if they've said anything negative about them, I didn't hear that, and I don't want to hear it. I'm just gonna keep eating my eggs. Uh,
Well, I think we've got to do what feels right to us and makes sense to us.
that's true.
Regardless. And I don't mean just totally ignore everything everybody says and go out eat triple cheeseburgers and
Right.
fries every
Right.
day or anything like that. But because common sense, if you look at that's going to tell you that'll kill you.
Yeah, yeah. Shelby, it's been delightful, and will you come back again?
I would love to, George. I've enjoyed it tremendously, and I hope I haven't confused everybody terribly. But
No, 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 no. Listen, I always tell people we bring our guest on, and one of the primary things that we're trying to accomplish is to provoke people to think. You know, use that mechanism called the brain, which is the most marvelous mechanism, I think. That and the heart, well, of course, all the other things too. But use the brain, the God-given brain that works inside your head. Don't let somebody mechanically wind you up and you become like a little robot or a little wind-up toy.
well, I applaud that attitude. I agree completely.
If we had more of that thinking by individual people that considers them individual, their individual self, I think we'd be in a whole lot better shape. Shelby, you have shed some light on things. Uh, you didn't confuse no one. I can guarantee you didn't confuse anyone. You provoked us. You provoked us to think, and
Well, good.
someone, because we have listeners in the UK and Philippines and down the street, around the corner, across the nation. Someone, at least one, it'll probably be Espinlob here pretty soon, will go and he'll float off into cyberspace looking for some of this stuff. I mean, it provokes you to think, and you've done a fine, fine job, Shelby.
Thank you. That really makes me feel good because I think thinking and reasoning and really expanding our thoughts is it's so important.
It is. It is. And you brought it down on the bottom shelf so even I could understand it.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, not that I certainly do not consider you on the bottom shelf.
Oh,
And I'm glad if I was able to make sense, because I know some of that is difficult stuff that people may not have even encountered before, and it might have sounded, because I just sort of touched on it briefly, may have sounded kind of garbled.
I,
My
al-
apologies. Yeah.
I always tell people, don't ever say never, and don't always say always, because just because you haven't experienced it, maybe yet, doesn't mean that it isn't for real.
Well, I agree, and that's why the saying "make those words sweet and tender," because you might have to eat them someday, came about.
Shelby,
Always and never. Those are the two.
the best to you and everything you put your hand to. I hope it blossoms and blooms. And please come back.
Well, thank you. I wish the same for you, and I will be very happy to come back, George. I've enjoyed this tremendously.
Thank
you.
I've had a ball.
Me too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow. That will provoke you to think. That's what it's all about. I'll be right back. That was Mario Tomic, Tropic Danza. Hey, listen, I want to say give out a great big thank you to Shelby Beckett. That was most interesting. And I didn't need all the lights on anyhow. But nonetheless, I was taking I was taking no chances. Go to Shelby Beckett, Beckett, ShelbyBeckett.com, and there you can read all about it. She's got a very unique website. You can see the book. You can order the book. You can go to those frequently asked questions. I thought that was pretty neat. 10 tips on how to know if you're dead and what to do if you are. What to do if you're dead and what to do if you are. And then there's some other questions on there too. There is a place to order the book. Several places to order the book. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, from the publisher, or from Shelby herself. Her address is on there, and she'll send you an autographed copy if you so choose. There's some links on there, so go to ShelbyBeckett.com. And thank you so very, very much, Shelby. I was intrigued, and I had a ball. Tomorrow night, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Steve Rizzo will be with us. Maybe the name sounds familiar. Maybe some of you know the name quite well. But let me read something to you out of his book. As soon as I get to the right page here. Let's see, 5 comes after 4, right? Yeah, okay. Steve Rizzo, he has written a book, Get Your Shift Together. Get Your Shift Together. How to think, laugh, and enjoy your way to success in business and in life. Steve Rizzo, the attitude adjuster. Now let me read something to you. This is out of his book. In the early 1980s, I, meaning Steve Rizzo, was gaining momentum as a national headlining comedian. Many up-and-coming comics like Dennis Miller and Rosie O'Donnell opened for me. On the road, I shared the stage with Eddie Murphy, Rodney Dangerfield, Jerry Seinfeld, Helen DeGeneres, and Richard Pryor. By 1994, I was flying high with a list of TV comedy specials to my credit. Sounds promising, doesn't it? Despite this success, and after much soul-searching, I made a major shift and decided to do something more meaningful with my life. I remember being with my friend and roommate comedian Drew Carey and telling him I was through with the business. That's it, I said. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going back home. Carey said, you can't leave now, you're too close. And that's when it hit me. How can it be that I'm so close to something I don't want? Making it, to use show business parlance, no longer held the allure for me that it once had. Within a matter of days, I packed my things and went back home to New York. He was there. I mean, he was there. He was with all the greats. And some of them even opened for him. Here's one more thing. He said, I'm here to tell you that no matter what your given circumstances, you can adjust your attitude and create a brighter reality. It's not the bad neighborhood you grew up in that led you on the wrong path. It's not the teacher who shunned your artistic talents or the parent who suggested you weren't good enough that caused you to become stagnant. And it's not the illness you have or the accident that left you physically challenged that's keeping you in a state of isolation. He goes on to say this, I am in no way trying to trivialize life's tribulations. Let's face it, some of us have had a great deal of pain to deal with. However, it is essential for your well-being that you understand that circumstances, events, or situations are not the final word on your quality of life, no matter the severity. It's how you respond to them and the fear and other negative emotions that makes the difference. And more than anything, it's about making the mental shift in attitude that will allow you to power through whatever life throws at you. In fact, it's all about attitude. It's always been about attitude and always will be about attitude. Mr. Steve Rizzo, he'll be with us tomorrow night, and he will tell us some very interesting stories. One about his brother, others about other folks. And he is the attitude adjuster. Mr. Steve Rizzo, former stand-up comedian. He still uses his comedy. He still has a great sense of humor. He still makes people laugh. It's just in a different setting. So join us tomorrow night, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, right here on the Spreaker Network for another wonderful guest, Mr. Steve Rizzo, on the George Espinlaub Show. Here's a funky old sound that Charlie found, and let's do this.
My darling, I have a confession. My nerves get so shook each time that you cook. It's something I don't want to mention, but all that we eat sure don't taste like meat. Lately I have started thinking this stuff you call stew ain't made with tofu. The kitchen is constantly stinking, and I can't place that smell that I hear someone yell. My mind's not at ease with your weird recipes. My dear, I don't mean to be rude. So when I say please, let's go out for Chinese, I don't mean the people, but food. I think you might be a cannibal. This line ain't a whip, but don't give me no lip. My girlfriend might be a cannibal. It's worse than I feared, just choked on an ear. The tea kettle's constantly hissing. Thought you pulled a prank when you served beans and frank. The homeless in town are all missing. Need a stomach pump from eating roast rum. With every meal you are quick to reveal the tasty extent of your plan. Oh, how sick I feel when you try to conceal. Your cookbook is called To Serve Man. I think you might be a cannibal. You think you're quite the chef, but what happened to Jeff? But if all our meals are plannable, it's really not that smart. We throw a donner party. Folks that survived that horrible crash in the snow, I don't think they strive to return to their lives to start a TV cooking show. I think you might be a cannibal. You don't know what all this anguish is over finger sandwiches. My girlfriend might be a cannibal. You bat your eyes so sweetly until you whisper, eat me. I think you might be a cannibal. My spine starts to shiver each time you serve liver. Your favorite chef is Hannibal. Favo beans are campy, so is chilled Chianti.
Hey, I hope you had a wonderful time tonight. I sure did. I had a lot of fun. Thank you, Shelby. ShelbyBeckett.com. Go there. You'll have a lot of fun. Get the book. Get the books. She's written several. ShelbyBeckett.com. And don't forget to go to ChrisStevens.com and keep voting. We want him up on the stage in New York City at Madison Square Garden in April, opening for Eric Clapton. And as of this morning, he still didn't have electricity in Morocco. But I imagine it's back on by now. Anyhow, I sure hope you enjoyed yourself tonight. If we put a smile on your face, but for a few seconds, that's great. If we made you as crazy as the rest of us, that's even better. If we done both of those two things, we are extremely happy. Wow. Hey, there's a whole lot of love that comes to you from the Funny Farm. We mean that. Email me, georgece@comcast.net, georgece@comcast.net, and we'll answer every one of them. If it's nighttime where you're at, have a great night. If it's already tomorrow, have a great day. Regardless of what it is or where you're at. Until tomorrow night, same time, same station. Right here, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Spreaker.com. This is George Espinlaub saying good night, stay safe, God bless you.